The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. A year ago, the progressive world was turned upside down. Today, we hear from two critics about why Democrats never saw it coming. Professor Mark Lilla says liberals need to take a, quote, big humility pill, close quote. Longtime progressive editor Charlie Peters, in an encore presentation, says Democrats don't have to change positions, they have to explain them better to blue-collar America. And Bill Press talks with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal about the Republicans' new tax plan. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Professor and essayist Mark Lilla says that when the economy is doing well, class politics doesn't work, and neither does identity politics. And we say hello to Mark Lilla, professor of humanities at Columbia University. He specializes in intellectual history and is author of a controversial new book, The Once and Future Liberal, After Identity Politics. Mark Lilla, thanks so much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
You're quite welcome, and our pleasure having you with us. Your book takes quite a shot at the identity politics of the left, but if you look at American political history, all the way back to, say, Andrew Jackson at least, haven't the successful candidates been the ones who appeal to the emotional needs of a variety of interest groups?
Well, there are three kinds of way of practicing politics, especially at the national level. I would call them vision politics, interest politics, and identity politics. Interest politics of the sort you're talking about has always been with us, right? That there are agrarian interests versus manufacturing interests. There are southern interests and northern interests, and so on. And that's the way democracy works. But when big changes happen in our country, it's because we've risen above just interest group politics, and someone, a party or a leader, articulates a vision of what kind of country we want to be, an inspiring vision that people can identify with, and that is hopeful, because Americans think of politics as a project. This country is a project, and when you paint a vision like that, you can rally people, and FDR did it, Kennedy did it in a small way, and Reagan did it on the other side. So it's possible to get people even beyond interest group politics. Identity politics, on the other hand, is something new. It's not just interest group politics in the sense that, let's say, African Americans have an interest, women have an interest, gays have an interest, all of them have an interest in being protected, their rights being protected, and also certain kind of social programs that help them. But identity politics is not about social justice for groups and campaigns for them that anybody can join. Identity politics has become about the self, how individuals define themselves, and this kind of ideology of identity gets promoted in our colleges and universities, and young people are trained now to think about politics as an emanation of how they define themselves, which limits their interest in politics to issues that touch on to that identity, and also makes it difficult for them to imagine compromising, making trade-offs, and joining a larger coalition. And that kind of identity politics really does divide us, as opposed to interest group politics, because interest groups understand that they have to balance their interests with each other if they're going to win. But identity politics becomes evangelical, and it has trouble focusing on winning. It's about moral purity, and it's not about taking power.
Now, you and other political experts on the left say Democrats failed to speak to the Trump voters on their own terms. But to me, these are the voters that typically despise the highly educated, prosperous folks. Are you suggesting Democrats cater to their resentments?
No, I suggest that Democrats speak to their needs, so they are focused on their resentments, and their resentments are being fanned by a rabid Republican Party and its media wing. Those sorts of appeals to resentment only work if we're not speaking to their needs in a way that's convincing, and their needs are not their resentment. Their needs are to feel that the Democrats understand their economic problems, their feelings about their country, their feelings about their their way of life, and that the Democrats will stand up for them. And so that's why we need a vision and a focus on our principles. So then we can go. So the basic principles of the American liberals and progressives are essentially solidarity and equal protection under the law. If we focus on those, we can go to a formerly manufacturing town in the Midwest and explain why solidarity means that we want to make sure that there's unemployment insurance. We want to make sure there's retraining. We want to make sure the economy functions well for people there. We want to make sure that their kids have health insurance, that they don't have to worry about what happens to their parents when they age. But that's what it means for them. We can then go out and also explain to a single mother on the south side of Chicago why those principles also apply to her, and why we're going to fight in order to make her neighborhood safe, to make sure that the police behave, and all those sorts of things, right? And so if we focus on the vision and the message and keep people focused above their resentments and their identities, you have a better chance of bringing them together for a common purpose.
Kind of like getting to them before it turns to resentment.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, but here's something else, though. Is it not a problem for Democrats, not that they failed to appeal to the deplorables, but that their own rising American electorate failed to vote? And how much blame do you assign to, say, Bernie Sanders and Jill Stein for that?
Yeah, well, I haven't looked at the numbers enough to really understand them, but interestingly, Hillary Clinton in her new book works through some of the numbers and says in key states that the votes for Bernie and especially the votes for Jill Stein really hurt her. But the deeper problem is, this fantasy that seized many Democrats after 2008, that there was a rising American electorate of young people, certain minorities, and we assumed how they're going to vote, and we just wait until they're a tipping point, and we can win that population and dominate the rest of the country, which is a lousy picture of how you want to be successful in politics. Now, there are a couple problems with those. One problem is that those groups do not vote and behave in the way we expect them to. Latinos vote surprisingly, nearly a third or a quarter to a third vote for Republican candidates, but that's also because they're conservative on social issues, especially abortion. And then you have other groups that, as they become economically more successful, their views on economic matters certainly become more conservative. And young people, when they become old people, become, also more conservative. But the real problem with it is that it's to focus that fantasy assumes that all that matters is national politics, especially the presidency. And we focus too much attention on the presidency. The real action in American politics, where progressive gains are being rolled back, is at the state and local level. And if you're in a state that does not have these populations, heavily represented, they're heavily represented on the two coasts, then you've got to have a message that reaches people who do not come from those groups. And if you want to prevent the rollback that's happening in places like Wisconsin regarding union rights, or in other states regarding voting rights for African Americans, or other states where abortion rights are being rolled back, you've got to be able to talk to people who live there. Geography matters in our politics.
We're speaking with Mark Lilla, Professor of Humanities at Columbia University, author of the new book, The Once and Future Liberal, After Identity Politics. Mark, you seem to praise Sanders for saying identity politics is not as important as fighting oligarchies. So does that mean exploiting class differences instead of appealing to a variety of groups based on their identities?
Well, class politics is an improvement over identity politics, because at least you have a picture of the country and a division in the country between those who are benefiting from our economic arrangements, no matter what their backgrounds, and those who are not. So at least you have a commonality that gets beyond our self-definitions. But the limitation of class politics are two, that what you don't articulate, if you focus just on class, are the principles, the fundamental principles that are motivating you to care about class differences. And if you don't do that, then you can't explain all sorts of other policies that you are for. The other thing is that we know from American history that the moment the economy improves, class appeals don't work. And so it depends on a lousy economy or an economy that's highly divided, and that could change. And so we've got to think beyond, in a more abstract sense, of the principles that inform our concerns about the economy, informs our concerns about, let's say, police treatment of African Americans, and informs our concern about abortion rights, and focus on those two fundamental principles of solidarity and equal protection, and derive everything from them.
A lot of the critics of the Clinton campaign say the result of the election was a repudiation of liberal values. But didn't the Russians, the FBI, misogyny, and the Electoral College itself kind of come together in a perfect storm to invalidate that ideological criticism?
Look, any electoral victory or defeat is overdetermined. You can point to any particular thing that might have tipped the balance. I'm not looking just at the last election. I'm looking at the fortunes of liberalism in the Democratic Party over the past 30 years. And the fact is, and especially if you focus on state and local races, there are large parts of the country that have become no-go zones for us. And we cannot protect people in those areas if we can't reach them. And so we've got to stop thinking so much about the presidency, think more about Congress, and face the fact that there are parts of the countries we can't go. And that means going there, getting out of, yes, our bubbles on the two coasts with people we're comfortable with, coffee we're comfortable with, Wi-Fi we're comfortable with, and going places where people don't want to hear from us. And we need to work for the next generation on persuading people there that the fundamental values we stand for are things that can help them and that fundamentally they should stand for as well.
What is the prescription for progressives to overcome the Trump disaster?
Well, I think it begins where I just left off, and that is we need to take a big humility pill and not blame our losses on racism or the FBI or the personality of Trump or any of that. The larger story is a large chunk of the country has developed contempt for us, and they've developed contempt for a cartoon of us that has been drawn for them by the Republican Party and their radical right media. That is part of our environment. We cannot pretend that Fox News and Hannity and the rest don't exist, and we can't tell ourselves whether they're always going to pick on something. We have been playing their game for them, and that has got to stop. We've got to get back out in the areas of the country that we're losing and get to know people, get to reach them, put aside some of our own prejudices, find common ground, build bridges, and to start conveying a picture of the country as a country and not as warring groups with different interests. And so we've got to get away from the two coasts, and we've got to go to Wisconsin.
Okay. Mark Lilla, Professor of Humanities at Columbia University. His book, The Once and Future Liberal, After Identity Politics. Mark, as always, we appreciate your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org and look forward to having you back again with us soon.
Okay, let's get out there and win.
Absolutely. 2018 is not that far away. Thanks again, right. Mark. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure.
I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Charlie Peters, a longtime progressive editor who remembers the New Deal, says Democrats are guilty of failing to reach out to Americans who listen to right-wing radio and television. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Would you give your house key to a complete stranger? Letting that person, whose name you don't even know, walk right into your home when you're not there? One stranger who's brazenly asking you and millions of other people to do just that is Jeff Bezos. He's head honcho of Amazon, the e-commerce behemoth whose vast supercomputer network routinely compiles and stores dossiers on every one of his customers. He's obsessed with having the most data on the most people. It's a little creepy. Now, adding to the creep factor, Jeff literally wants Amazon to get inside your home, and ironically, he's using security as his rationale. Rather than simply delivering the products you order from Amazon to your doorstep, the corporation wants a key to unlock your door, allowing its delivery crews to go inside and do you the favor of placing the packages securely in your abode. What could possibly go wrong with that? Other than you being robbed, of course, either by rogue Amazon employees or by hackers, who will certainly gain access to the corporation's computerized key codes. Or maybe Crusher, your pit bull, mauls the Amazon intruder and you get sued. Need I mention that Bezos expects you to pay for the privilege of having his employees enter your home? First, his dicey Open Sesame program, which he calls Amazon Key, is available only to customers who shell out $99 a year to be Amazon Prime members. Second, you must buy a special internet unlocking gizmo and a particular camera to join his corporate key club. And guess where you must go to buy this entry technology? Yes, Amazon, where prices for the gizmo and camera setup start at $250. This is Jim Hightower saying, what a deal! For Amazon, that is. Bezos' real goal is not to get inside your home, but inside your wallet.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Charlie Peters, founder of the influential Washington Monthly, blames progressives for not understanding the views of the other side. This is an encore presentation from earlier this year. We say hello to Charles Peters, who served in the West Virginia legislature. He helped manage JFK's West Virginia primary victory, helped found the Peace Corps, and founded the highly influential Washington Monthly magazine. He's also a prolific author in his latest book, We Do Our Part Toward a Fairer and More Equal America. Charlie Peters, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Glad to be with you.
And nice to have you with us as well. Clearly, you are not a fan of Donald Trump, but your book harkens back to the New Deal. So, in a sense, aren't you, too, advocating making America great again?
He's making America great in some power sense. The New Deal was for making America great in the sense that we were all together and helping each other.
Now, you suggest that Democrats have gone off the rails, partly because the coastal elites have emphasized too many social issues like gay rights, abortion, guns, and the environment. Should they stop talking about those things to win 2018 and 2020 elections?
I don't think they have to stop, change their position on those things. I think they have to explain their position and argue with the other side with more understanding of the legitimate concerns of the other side, and this they have notably failed to do. On abortion, for instance, they are not sensitive to the point that the science now points to the early viability of the fetus, and so that the anti-abortion people, have a legitimate concern that we need to acknowledge, just like we want the people on the right to acknowledge the legitimacy of environmental science. We have to show we understand the other side, and that we don't think the people who have these other views, like on guns, that they're all a bunch of idiots, because they are. And when we treat them like a bunch of idiots, they feel just as you would feel if somebody treated you like an idiot. Mm-hmm. You would not like them. And
yeah, absolutely. Right. Now, your analysis is similar to that of Thomas Frank, who seems to blame the Democrats' demise actually on well-educated, wealthy liberals. So what is wrong with getting an Ivy League education if you can, making money honestly, and trying to help the less fortunate?
There's nothing at all, nothing wrong with any of those things, as long as you don't feel you're better than the next guy because you've done them.
Mm-hmm. Now, certain working-class white men in 4 states elected Donald Trump. Shouldn't they, and not liberals, be blamed for the disaster facing this country?
Well, I don't think we should think of them all as pure innocents, and they aren't. They have many of them have been converted to very ugly feelings by a combination of all the years of coded racism, of propaganda from the Rush Limbaughs and Fox Newses, so and now the Donald Trumps and Breitbart and Steve Bannon, all of those have brought out very ugly feelings on the part of many average Americans. But what my point is that liberals have been guilty in what's happened in the success of the Fox Newses and the Rush Limbaughs, because they have failed to reach out to the average American as the Rush Limbaughs and Fox News have succeeded in doing.
We're speaking with Charles Peters, who's founder of the highly influential Washington Monthly magazine. Also, he's an author, and his latest book is We Do Our Part Toward a Fairer and More Equal America. Charlie, you come from coal country. How can the few remaining miners be duped into thinking that Trump can bring back those jobs? I mean, isn't it the case that a rational economy would not want those jobs back?
Oh no, and I am no friend of coal mining. I've seen it kill too many people and wreck too many lives and give those miners black lung and despoil the environment of, particularly of southern West Virginia. It's one of the great environmental tragedies of history. Frankly, I hate coal mining, but I think anybody who has opposed coal mining and wanted to had to have come up with a program that would create jobs where to fill the vacancy left by the disappearance of coal.
Now, how much of the split in American politics do you think is due to race?
Oh, it's always been a factor. The thing is, with Martin Luther King and the approach of Martin Luther King, the nonviolent approach, it was things were getting so much better. There were so many other factors of Franklin Roosevelt's wife Eleanor, the movies that in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, even the radio show Amos and Andy and the television show, they all had the effect of humanizing blacks. And so lynching plummeted. The legal rights of blacks greatly increased from the Fair Employment Practices Commission during the war to Truman desegregating the armed forces in 1948. Brown versus Board desegregating the schools in 1954, then to the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and 65. So this was the greatest progress in history of, or at least since Reconstruction of in legal rights for blacks. So it was a great time. Then came the death of the assassination of King, the race riots, and then a development in Black America of an angry threat of violence movement. The Black Panthers being an example, and that scared the pants off of the white Americans, whose King's approach had been moderating their racial feelings and getting them to accept integration. In 1960, I was bragging to Jack Kennedy about how rapidly West Virginia was integrating its schools, faster than many of the other states acting under the Brown versus Board decision. We were driving down to a college in West Virginia State, and I said, Senator, I want you to know that college is 50% white, 50% black, and everybody's getting along fine. So that was the way. I sponsored a human rights bill in the state legislature, and there was no George Wallace that got up to oppose it. It went through with relative ease. So it was just things were really getting a lot better. And now, because of these factors I mentioned before, things have, and the exacerbation of racial feelings, of the coded racism, of which I think Nixon and Ronald Reagan were guilty. Remember Ronald Reagan's welfare queen,
Mm-hmm.
That was coded racism. And Reagan has gotten a free pass in history, but he was very guilty of that, and as was Nixon, and certainly Rush Limbaugh and Fox News, and Bill O'Reilly.
Absolutely. And you remain optimistic about the future, but I've got to ask you why, especially since so few young people want to enter public service.
Oh, I'm optimistic because I think we have no choice. If we want to make things better, young people have to wake up. And I saw signs that they were waking up. I saw signs in the Sanders campaign. I didn't agree with Bernie on everything, but Bernie was sublimely right about the 1% having too much. And a lot of young people got onto that. A lot of young people began to care. And I think now that Trump has been one of the great wake-up calls of history for liberal Democrats. You better get out there and vote. You better get out there and work in the Democratic Party, and you better start running for your office and helping other people, good people, run for office. If you don't do that, if you leave that to the Republicans, if you leave that to the bad guys, if you leave that to the Koch brothers, we're going to go on losing. You want to start winning, and you want to start winning for the good causes we believe in.
Amen. Charles Peters, editor, political theorist, founder of the highly influential Washington Monthly Magazine. Of course, he is an author as well, and his latest book is We Do Our Part Toward a Fairer and More Equal America. Charlie, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it and look forward to having you back again soon.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington State about tax cuts for the rich.
You know, I don't know if you saw, but and I'm going blank on his name, was it Bennett? Ronald Reagan's, the guy that worked for Jack Kemp that wrote the 1981 tax cuts.
Paul Manafort?
That's what he was doing back then. Oh, gosh, I can't think of his name. But anyway, he has come out and said that he was an architect of those tax cuts, and this trickle-down theory doesn't work any more today than it did back then.
Yeah, I saw this. I forgot who it was that said it.
But they keep
something
selling
with a
it.
B. I think it was Bennett.
They keep selling it.
They keep selling it. But
and fools keep falling for it.
But we have to keep lifting up Kansas. I mean, Kansas is the most recent, closest example of how ridiculous this theory is. They did the same thing in Kansas. They cut the tax rate for the wealthiest. Mm-hmm. They did the same pass-through exemption, and they ended up cutting $700 million in spending. They had to go to less than a full year education, public education, because they didn't have any money. Their roads went into disrepair. They were downgraded. Their debt was downgraded by the ratings agencies. And it was all passed under Brownback and a Republican legislature in 2012. But they just had to roll it all back. A Republican legislature just rolled it all back and said, this is crazy. We can't keep doing this. We have to roll back these tax cuts. It's not working. So that's what the public needs to think about. That's what we need to get the word out on.
All right. So are they together at all on a bill? Is there a bill? And when will we see it?
We don't have a bill, and they are rewriting the entire U.S. economy without a single hearing. There have been no hearings
on
this bill. Democrats have no idea what's in it. I think there are a lot of Republicans that have no idea what's in it. So they are rewriting the U.S. economy without a single hearing, stealing money from working families across the country without a single hearing.
And so the plan is to bring this to a vote in the House without a single hearing.
Correct.
Right.
They're saying they're going to bring it out today. Last I heard, 11:15. I don't know if something has transpired in the last hour, but that's what they're saying. They're going to release it today, and then they're saying we're going to vote on it in 2 weeks. We don't have a Congressional Budget Office score yet. There's no information on it. Things are changing even as we speak. Every day we hear something different. This morning I heard that they were thinking about not making the 20% corporate tax cut permanent because, of course, they've got a huge problem with the deficit in the second decade as well. Wharton came out with a study yesterday or 2 days ago, Monday. It was Monday, that basically said increases the debt. I think they said $3.5 trillion in the first decade and then up to $10 trillion after that. They said there's no way that these tax cuts are going to provide for growth in the economy. They said 1.3 to 1.4% growth in the economy at best, and they're projecting a 3% growth in the economy. Sustained. So, I mean, this is a bad deal for American families. That's what it comes down to.
Right. Do you believe today that they'll be able to get anything through before the end of the year?
I'm very worried. And I'm worried because of the budget reconciliation instructions that only require 51 votes in the Senate. I'm worried because Mitch McConnell in the past has done all kinds of things to blow up the rules when he can't get what he wants, as he did with the Supreme Court. And so I am very worried because the pressure is high on them to get something through. And I have heard a lot of Republicans saying, I might just have to go along with this because we need to be able to go back and say we got something done.
Yeah.
So I'm very worried, but I think that we can beat it back. I just think people have to know about it. They have to fight it the way that we did with healthcare and kill this thing.
Right. And so far, there are even, as you pointed out, some Republicans who are not willing to go along with what they've seen so far. So it's not certain, even though they've kind of designed it so they don't need any Democratic votes, it's not certain that they could get enough Republican votes.
That's right. And the budget is a good test of that.
The budget was 216 to 212, right?
That's
or something
right.
Like that.
It was just 4 votes, barely made it through.
And this was Paul Ryan's.
Yep. 20 Republicans voted against that. And the majority of them, it had to do with the state and local tax issue. Right. But I also think the deficit, I mean, for a lot of, like the Jeff Flake kind of Republicans of the world, that idea.
Well, they all used to be deficit hawks, remember, when Democrats were in charge.
They said they were deficit hawks, but every
true.
Republican administration or Congress has actually increased the deficit.
Well, that's when they're in charge.
Exactly. And then Democrats come in and have, somehow we become the deficit hawks.
Or deficit doves, depending on who's in charge. I have to ask you about a couple of other issues. Today, or maybe it was yesterday, I believe it was. Yesterday was the first day people could sign up for Obamacare. Now, that's one of the biggest secrets in this country today because this administration, of course, has done nothing at all to advertise that, to encourage people to sign up, to assist people in signing up. Yeah. But they did shorten the enrollment period
by
as
half,
well.
From 90 days to 45. Some states have extended it, like our state of Washington has extended it. But yes, no, it's not just that they haven't done anything. They've actually been actively undermining enrollment.
The programs that would assist people.
They cut 90% of the outreach budget. Jesus. So there was an outreach budget to encourage people to sign up. They cut 90% of that budget. So,
it's too early, I guess, to tell whether are people signing up? Are people renewing their policies?
I think it's tough. I think that a lot of low-income communities and communities of color will not sign up for 2 reasons. One, nobody's contacting them and they don't know what's happening. And number 2, because of all the instability and all the attempts to attack Obamacare and the subsidies, controversy, after they got rid of the subsidies for low-income families, the insurance companies are nervous. And so they have increased their premiums across the board. So it's almost like a 35% increase in premiums. So it's become really quite unaffordable. I mean, I've had a lot of constituents and friends who are signing up for Obamacare, for the Affordable Care Act, who are saying, I don't know if I can afford it, because they've done everything they can administratively to drive up the costs, to drive down enrollment, and to make it very difficult for it to succeed. And they want people to say, oh, the Affordable Care Act is not succeeding. But let's be clear, it's the Republican administration, Trump administration, that's destroying any chance for families to get affordable health care.
I'm sure there are also a lot of people, because of all the publicity around this and all the negative publicity, who think that Obamacare is no longer available, right? I mean, they think they did actually repeal it.
No, that's true.
Or
that's 100% true.
Or that it's not affordable, or that it's not, whatever.
Yes, that too. And also, people don't like Obamacare, but they like the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah,
it's kind of a bizarre situation where people don't really know what they have, but they do know that if they had health insurance, they do know that they liked a lot of the things that they had, and there were a lot of people who got health insurance that hadn't before.
On another issue, yesterday, this article from The Hill, we know earlier there were articles of impeachment against Donald Trump filed by Al Green, Congressman Al Green from Texas, and Congressman Brad Sherman from California. Yesterday, your colleague, Congressman Luis Gutierrez from Illinois, announced he's going to file new articles of impeachment with another group of Democrats. And there's an article in Politico this morning that Leader Pelosi did everything she could yesterday to shut down this talk about impeachment. Have you signed on to either one of these articles of impeachment?
I haven't signed on to anything yet. I'll say that several of us have been really thinking about how we responsibly address the crisis that we have in front of us. And I think that we have to – I don't think there's a question of law in terms of knowing that there are significant constitutional impeachable violations that Donald Trump has committed. I mean, already. It seems to me that part is actually fairly clear. But impeachment is not just about the law. It's a political process. And in order for it to be successful, the majority party has to sign on to it. There's no way to move impeachment proceedings forward without the majority. And so then the question really becomes, well, what is the goal? And does it help us or hurt us in taking back the majority? And does it help us or hurt us in building a movement that allows people to understand how Donald Trump is violating the Constitution? And I think there's just a lot of pieces in there. So there's I'll just say, I'm on the Judiciary Committee is the other thing. And the thing that bothers me tremendously is that we have done so many things to try and have the Judiciary Committee exert the jurisdiction that it should have over these, constitutional violations, resolutions of inquiry. We've requested hearings. We've held our own hearings outside of judiciary because Goodlatte won't do anything. And even after Mueller's indictments, Ranking Member Conyers sent a letter to Goodlatte saying, we really need to be holding hearings on all these things. We're getting nowhere on it. And so, they might drive us to having to file articles, but I do think we have to make sure that they don't backfire on us, and that we have a way to be utilizing them to really show Americans what has happened. They have to be, in my mind, very legally soundproof in the wording. I don't think it's I think it's a serious thing.
Right. So you're not there yet.
I'm not. I'm thinking. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking.
It is. Yeah. And I certainly agree. I think, Congressman Green has been in studio with us a couple of times. You could easily make a case for impeachment today. You don't have to wait for Robert Mueller.
Yes.
Although some people also say, let's wait and see what Mueller comes up with.
No, I'm not in that category. I think that there are numerous, and I think that certainly the, all of the conflicts of interest and emoluments clause for sure, I even think some of the threats around pulling licenses, from television stations. I mean, the kind of cutting down of the press. But the thing is, impeachment has never been a legal process. It's all about when does the country get to that tipping point.
Right.
And if you do it too soon, I do think it could backfire. And I don't know where I go back and forth. Let me say I would sleep much better in some ways if we filed them. But at the same time, I think, it's not about talking to people like you in the studio. It's about talking to the American people and talking to the Republicans.
And let's agree it will be a different day when Democrats take back control of the House in 2018.
Exactly.
Right. Now, if you are right that they're going to reveal this tax cut plan at 11:15, we better get on our horse because you've got to be there, and I'm supposed to be on CNN today at 11:15 talking about it.
All right,
well, that might be the time. I saw in political.
Well, who knows what we'll be talking about?
I don't know.
We may not have.
Because
we may have nothing to talk about.
Just say lies, lies, lies.
There it is. Yeah, exactly.
I got my line right here. Cut, lies, lies, lies. Thanks so much, Congresswoman.
Thank you.
Thanks for who you are and for what you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me in.
That's all for AmericasDemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Mark Lilla, Charlie Peters, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.